Hello, I'm David March from Florida State University. I'm going to present some work on the automaticity of threat processing. So, there's a whole literature on what's become known as the threat superiority effect. This is defined by me as the tendency to detect, classify, respond, attend to, and perceive threatening stimuli preferential to other positive or neutral stimuli. So to be clear, threat here isn't threats to self-esteem or group status or resources, but threats to immediate physical harm. And this effect has been found in research using both subliminal and supraliminal stimuli. So supraliminal stimuli can be things like objects. So people are faster to find these snakes embedded amongst these flowers than flowers embedded amongst these snakes. And even with things presented in virtual reality, people are still more quick to find the threatening thing than the non-threatening thing. They also find the same effect for faces. People are faster to find the angry face embedded amongst the neutral faces than they are to find the happy face embedded amongst the neutral face. This has also been shown for the same types of stimuli, objects, and faces using subliminal presentation. So here's an example of a study using the startle eye blink, which measures the amplitude of the eye blink reflex initiated by a loud noise while viewing or post-viewing subliminal pictures. What you're seeing here is that, subliminally, people blink the hardest when they're probed during a negative relative to a neutral or a positive stimuli, which is similar to the pattern that they show for supraliminal presentations of those same types of stimuli. And the way that threat superiority is possible is due to some pretty nifty evolved neural architecture. So what we're going to see here is kind of a gross representation of how information is processed, but it will get the general point across. So the idea is that information is processed via two pathways, a low road and a high road. So information kind of comes in, it's passed to both roads through the thalamus. The low road sends it to the amygdala, which initiates a response before this high road has had a chance to send kind of a more nuanced and contextualized response. And so you get this kind of quick and dirty, gross feature response before you get a more detailed response. And so you get this threat superiority to things that have been conditioned or kind of innately, associated with threat. And so there's this great big threat processing literature that says that, rapid detection and avoidance of imminent danger is crucial responsibility of the mind. And humans have extensively inherited this neural architecture that preferentially processes and responds to these immediate survival threats, right? So that's threat superiority. And, it manifests as these earlier and faster detection of and stronger responses to threatening than non-threatening stimuli. We've shown this using both subliminal and supraliminal presentations, using all kinds of different, both physiological and neurological and behavioral responses. But the point of my talk today is to make the case that there are two problems that complicate attributing those effects from all that literature to an acute threat sensitivity. So there's one problem, which has been addressed but remains relevant to the current work, is that threatening stimuli are also negative. And without distinguishing threatening from negative stimuli, most studies cannot differentiate sensitivity to threat versus just a negativity bias. So in my previous work, I addressed this problem by comparing responses to stimuli that were threatening, non-threatening, but also negative, what I just call negative, positive, and neutral. So relative to other stimuli, threatening stimuli were detected more quickly, more frequent targets of initial eye gaze, and elicited stronger startle eye blinks. So it seems like threat stimuli are at least processed uniquely, but are they processed preferentially? Well, that's a good question. The reason for that question is because supraliminal presentations do not distinguish whether faster and stronger responses to threat are due to threat superiority effects or to the opposing effects of attention and conscious processes evoked by non-threatening stimuli. So for example, faster detection of threat in visual search tasks might reflect slower disengagement from non-threat stimuli. And stronger startle eye blinks to threat might reflect greater attentional capture, to these non-threatening or these positive stimuli, which inhibits blinking. So this problem, I'm going to make the case in the talk today, could be rectified with subliminal presentations of stimuli, which prevents conscious perception and eliminates that competing effect of conscious processing and isolates the hypothesized effect of threat superiority. And there are subliminal studies consistent with threat superiority in terms of stronger skin conductance and startle eye blink, but unfortunately, like those subliminal work before mine, none of those studies distinguish responses to threat stimuli from non-threatening negative stimuli. And consequently, those studies do not clarify whether the effects were unique to threat per se or a more general response to negativity. And so it's still unclear whether we're getting negativity bias or threat preferential processing. So the current work addresses both of these problems to test whether the mind is uniquely sensitive to survival threats. So in 2 pilot studies, I ensured the subliminal nature of the stimuli, and then 3 within subject studies subliminally presented threatening, negative, positive, and neutral stimuli and assessed skin conductance, startle eye blink, and evaluative inference. If the mind is uniquely sensitive to threats as a functional adaptation for survival, then reflexive responses like skin conductance and startle eye blink should be stronger to subliminally presented threats than non-threatening negative stimuli, and such responses should influence downstream judgments. So here you can see the details of the 3 studies. First study did EDA, the second study did startle, and the last study did an evaluative inference task. And I'll talk more about that on the next slide. So this is the basic design of all of the studies. Here's an example of just some of the stimuli: neutral, positive, negative, and threat stimuli. The first study, which was skin conductance, each trial began with a centrally located fixation dot, followed by a 21 millisecond target image and then a post mask. And studies 2 and 3, where I measured FEMG, and study 3, where I measured a valence rating, also began here with a pre-mask, the stimulus, and then the post-mask. And for this valence rating one, they just rated what they thought the image was on a 1 to 5 scale. So here's what I found. So for study 1, what we're seeing here is skin conductance across time, right? Skin conductance is a slow response, and you can see that there was larger responses to threats than anything else. And here's startle eye blink, and what we're seeing is larger startle eye blink responses to threats than anything else. And in study 3, the evaluative inference task, where they're rating the valence, we can see that there was more negative ratings of threat relative to anything else. And so in all 3 studies here, and here, we're seeing that threat differed from the other 3, and there was no systematic variability amongst any of the responses to negative, neutral, or positive stimuli in any of these 3 studies. And so across 3 studies, we've got really strong evidence for threat superiority using subliminal presentations. And so to summarize, the empirical literature on threat sensitivity has suffered 2 problems. First, distinguishing threatening stimuli from negative stimuli, and also just differentiating whether responses are sped and strengthened by threat sensitivity or delayed and diminished by conscious attention to non-threatening stimuli. So I addressed both problems in the current work by comparing responses to empirically validated sets of threatening, negative, positive, and neutral stimuli, and isolating threat sensitivity from the opposing effects of conscious attention via subliminal presentations. And consistent with the mind's sensitivity to survival threats, subliminally presented threatening stimuli elicited stronger skin conductance, startle eye blinks, and more negative downstream evaluative responses relative to the undifferentiated responses to negative, positive, and neutral stimuli. And so in total, the present work makes very clear that threat superiority is not a byproduct of conscious attention to non-threatening stimuli, and instead arises from the mind's sensitivity to survival threats.